was a good weekend. Both teams played well, and obviously both games were into 3-on-3, and then into a shootout Saturday night. I thought our goaltender played well both games, and we found a way to win the game Friday night with our goaltender pull, and then capitalizing on 3-on-3 in the overtime. And so overall, good weekend, and we've got 12 games under our belt right now, and 8 of them have been against Minnesota or Ohio State. So those 8 games have been good for our progress is trying to get better. And so looking at the games and the past weekend, some things we obviously have to work on, and we'll continue to that process as we get ready for Bemidji this weekend.
All right, we had a question from Alec.
Hey, Mark, you guys haven't really been able to play on your home ice a ton this season. For this weekend, kind of being the last home series, kind of crazy that's already here.
It's, all the coaches I'm sure you've talked to, talk about being an odd year, a goofy year. As I said earlier, we've played 12 games. That wouldn't even be a third of the way through our season. And so everything's, one day at a time. You look at things at the short view instead of a long view. And so instead of normally, what we need to do better to progress through the regular season, we're near the end. And so it's time to really hone in on the things that you're capable of doing and doing well right now. Try to pinpoint a couple things that you want to get stronger in, and then you got to go out and execute them. And especially for younger players, the freshmen, it's just been not a normal year for whatever sport that's going on. And so the growth that you normally would see in a freshman class, you would start to see some progression right now at 12 games, and then after 20 games, and you get into 25 or 30 games, you see a vast improvement from game 5 to game 25. But this year we don't have that. And so, we've had to throw our young players into a little bit of the wolves' den in regards to, the majority of our games have been against, a top 2 or top 3 team in the country. And again, if you look at the positive side of it, you can figure out what they need to do better individually and then collectively as a group. So after finishing this past weekend, there's some things that we need to hone in on, figure that out. The hard part is you only got this period of time to do it. This weekend against Bemidji, then a weekend off, and then the last regular season games up at Duluth. But it's odd because, as you mentioned, these will be our last two home games, and we haven't had too many up to this point. So chalk it up to, this year. And again, if you want to do something special, if you want to make the most out of it, now's the time to focus in and really put your foot forward and take a run at things.
We have a question from Todd Maluski, and then there's be a question after that from Jeff Patricus. So Todd.
Hi, Mark. You often talk about learning out of series against Minnesota. What did you gather about your team? What can you be better at coming out of what you learned last weekend?
Well, I think that, one thing I learned is, the 4 games we played against them, Kennedy's played really well in all 4 games and given us a chance to win. Obviously, when we played them up there this past weekend, some things that we need to do in our defensive zone as far as, exit plans and breaking out, defensive zone responsibility. When you play against a good team like Minnesota, other 4 games against Ohio State, you really have to be good one-on-one. If you don't do a good job one-on-one, there's going to be breakdowns and scoring opportunities for the other team. And we bended quite a bit, in some of our game, but that's going to happen. And, how can you recover? How can you, transition and get the puck back? But I think the one thing I learned when we play Ohio State, we played Minnesota, and certainly it's going to happen this weekend against Bemidji because they play very aggressive, is the better job you do of managing the puck, the better job you're going to do in regards to where you're playing the puck. And that just mean that if you're managing the puck well, chances are you're going to be down in the offensive zone more than you're going to be defending. If you're not managing the puck very well, especially in your own end and in the neutral zone, then you're probably going to be chasing the puck, defending the puck. and playing in your end, which is a lot more challenging and difficult. So a couple of those areas, Todd, that again, you get some more practices. If we had 20 more games, I guarantee you we'd get a lot better at it. Unfortunately, we don't have that. We just have the 3 or 4 practices this week. Then we'll get tested with Bemidji and see how we do, and then get ourselves ready for our game up at Duluth.
Question from Jeff Petrikis.
Yeah, Mark, you mentioned the difference this year, but with that off week after the Bemidji, do you hope to be able to take advantage of that time, maybe to get some extra work in to fine tune some things heading down into that last series and then in postseason?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing about that weekend off will be, where's our health? So when we get into the, ranking back a week from today on Monday, talk with our trainers and see how our health is. And then just, to me, it's a combination of 2 things. One, as you mentioned, trying to fine tune some things and prepare ourselves for Duluth. And the second part of it is to make sure we manage our practices and not try to do too much. Because even though we haven't played the number of games we normally would play, we certainly practice a lot. We had a lot of practices in September and October and November. And so it becomes a grind and a long season in our world in men's and women's hockey, because the season's so long. And so sometimes it's better if you do less. You'll gain more out of that than try to do more at the end and tire your players out. So practices will have to be a little bit shorter. But there'll be focused practices where you can get some work done, get them out of the rink, and make sure that when you're playing, certainly this Friday night, that they're energized, they're ready, and they're excited to play.
Another question from Todd Maluski.
Yeah, Mark, you've got 9 seniors that normally on the last weekend at home you'd be celebrating them. Do you know whether there's a celebration, what can you do, whether some of them will be coming back? There's a lot of factors there to consider when you're looking at what would be a senior weekend, I guess.
No, that's a real good question. We've had discussions about that probably the last 4 weeks in regards to what we wanted to do, if we could do anything. Obviously, the restrictions of not having people at the game other than immediate family for the players, it becomes challenging. So what we normally would do, we're not going to be able to do just because of the circumstances. And so, I'm not sure what, I don't think football did much. I'm not sure if Tony and men's hockey, what they're going to do, but I'm sure it's not going to be much. And certainly men's and women's basketball, it just sort of goes on that shoulder or that part of your dresser that says, chalk it off to COVID, because we're not able to do that stuff. But the more important stuff is to try to win a couple hockey games this weekend and get ourselves ready for the home stretch here and deal with that. To answer your second part of your question, we'll address all those things when our season's over, as far as who, what, how many, if any, of the seniors will be back next year on our squad because of what the NCAA has allowed those players to do. We'll have discussions with our administrators and what we want to do as a team and what we want to do collectively as an athletic department.
And we have a last question from Alec.
Hey, Mark, Bemidji, they've lost quite a few in a row, but their last 4 straight, all in overtime. I know it's early in the week, but from a scouting standpoint, what makes them tough and able to hang tight with pretty much anybody they play?
Well, I mean, they had a bumpy start from the standpoint of, like us, you play a couple games, then you have to take these long stretches off. And, it takes time, takes games, takes practices to get your team up to, what they're capable of doing. And, the one thing, history shows us is that they're going to come in there and they're going to play 60 minutes both nights at a high pace, and they're going to work extremely hard. And so we have to be ready for that and understand, our work habits and our competitive level to make sure that they don't exceed us in those areas. And, they make it very difficult. They make it very challenging to create scoring opportunities, to get the puck in the net. They're willing to block shots. Their goaltenders played well in their last 4 or 5 games. They really pack in the scoring area. So for you to get pucks to the net becomes challenging. So, we'll work on some things that hopefully we can create some opportunities in the offensive zone and create some loose pucks and get ourselves prepared to, play 6 difficult periods against a team that works extremely hard.